The first question that we need to answer if we're going to learn to love prayer is a really basic one. What is prayer? I want to make the argument in this video that the most significant effect on our prayer lives is our understanding and assumption about what prayer is. You see, many of us come to the table with God assuming that prayer is us asking Him for things. It's us casting need to Him, expecting Him to, in His sovereignty, choose what He's going to provide for us. Choose what He's going to say yes to, choose what He's going to say no to. I think that the scriptures paint a very different picture about what prayer is. In this video, I'm going to make the suggestion, I'm going to make the proposal to you that prayer is actually us embracing God's relational presence. Prayer is nothing less than relational communion with God. It's us wrestling with God. It's us embracing His presence with us. It's us talking to Him, listening to Him, experiencing Him. I want us to look at one simple verse to understand this properly. In Isaiah 57:15, we read, "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit." So in the first section of that verse, we hear what we assume we would hear about God. God's high and lifted up and exalted. But then surprisingly, Isaiah says God is also in a second place. God is dwelling with the one who is of a lowly and contrite spirit. Isaiah is saying God is near to the lowly. God is near to the humble. God is near to the one that simply opens themselves up to Him. Prayer is that humility. Prayer is that opening ourselves up to God to dwell with Him in relational communion. So, the key to understanding dwelling with God in that relational communion is the mega theme in Scripture called grace. Now, if you've been a Christian for very long, you've probably heard some definition of grace that goes like this. Grace is unmerited favor. That is a huge, significant component of what grace is, certainly. But grace in Scripture is a much more robust category than simply unmerited favor. 2 Peter 3:18 commands us to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus Christ. Well, if grace is merely unmerited favor, how do you grow in it? Even more challenging is Luke 2:52, where Jesus, as a growing child, Luke tells us, grew in favor with God and man. But that word favor is the same Greek word translated elsewhere throughout the New Testament as grace. Charis. The word for favor there is actually the word for grace. Jesus Himself had to grow in grace in His humanness, not in His divine nature, but as a man, He needed to learn how to grow in grace. That challenges all of our assumptions about grace, because certainly Jesus did not need to grow in unmerited favor. He had all the merit in His divinity and His perfections. He had all the favor of God upon Him as His beloved Son. But what we see as we zoom out for a broader scope on the Scriptures about a definition of grace that can actually help us and free us and become a tool to teach us to pray, I think could be summarized as this. Grace is the unmerited presence of God with all of its blessings. So we actually see that grace itself, the free gift that we are given in the gospel, the gift is the presence of God. And with that presence come all the blessings of God. If we can grasp grace as that, then we can realize that prayer is something that gives us not just access to ask God for things, but prayer gives us access to all that God brings to the table. Prayer is the way that we are satisfied in who God is. Prayer is the way that we experience the love of God in all of our deep need. Prayer is the way that we actually begin to learn more about us and our needs in all the mystery of what it means to be human. We are united to Jesus by faith in the gospel. Grace has given us the unmerited favor of God. But we need to move beyond union into communing with God if we are going to learn to love prayer. Jesus spoke of this directly. In Matthew 11, verse 28, Jesus said to his disciples, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It's one of the most precious promises in all of Scripture to me. And yet early on in my faith, I was wrestling. Jesus, you said that you give me rest as I come to you. Make it real for me. And over the last several years, what I've come to learn is that as I embrace a posture of prayerful communion, embracing God's relational presence with me, prayer is not me dialing up into heaven and asking God to help and then going on my way in aloneness through life. Prayer is opening up my heart to the real presence of God right in front of me. Prayer is me embracing God's presence as I go throughout life. Prayer is me talking to God internally as I am loving and serving and talking to other people around me. And as we embrace that reality, that prayer is relational communion with God, we experience Jesus' presence with us as he taught in Matthew 11. And the result is a filling peace and rest with him. If we can understand and embrace that, so many things that Scripture has to offer us will begin to be real to us as we learn to pray. So over these next 2 videos, we're going to be diving into a tangible tool rooted in Scripture that enables this kind of abiding, relationally communing prayer with God that hopefully, as we take it up, will teach us to love prayer.